Did you have a certain reason for changing it?
I did actually. I had what happened was, for me, the puzzle was sort of the pieces of my life. It reflected on everything was sort of fitting together because there were so many things that connected. But the autistic community gets very offended by puzzle pieces because there's an organization in the States called Autism Speaks, which branded a blue puzzle piece to sort of represent their organization, and sort of autism is this puzzling thing and a puzzle to be solved, and they see autism as a very negative thing that's like almost older videos of theirs. They treated it as if it was a horrible disease to be eradicated.
Wow.
Horrible. And so
then you got, wow, you must have gotten so much flash. Yeah.
So yeah, I knew nothing about this. And then I the day after I published my book, I suddenly got these people like, we're not a puzzle piece and we're not this. And I was,
ooh, wow.
What is that about? And it was really, and I left it for a while because I figured that if the people would pick up my book, because Autism Speak is probably the biggest organization, certainly in America, and they're sort of the authority. So if they pick up a book that would somehow identify with them, and then they would open and start reading, and they realize that my philosophy is very different from theirs, maybe it would change someone's viewpoint, without knowing that was going to happen. So I left it for a while. But then I realized that it was really upsetting people in the community.
Wow.
And then I guess the final thing, I mean, I left it for about a year, and I wrote an article about it, why I left it and what it really meant. And then I was in a Jewish women's group at some point, and for parents of autistic kids. And one of the women said, "Who designed your cover?" And was it a publisher or you? And I said, "No, it was me." She says, "Well, you just know it's this horrible thing." And I said, "Well, it really doesn't mean that." She said, "Well, you're trying to make it look good. Like it's like trying to turn a swastika into something positive."
Oh,
and I was
wow.
like,
oh,
okay,
my gosh.
That's it. If I'm upsetting somebody enough to have them think of related to a swastika, I'm done. And that was it. I got a designer the next day and switched the cover. Yeah.
Okay, so let me start because it doesn't really make a difference how many come now. It stays online, and then people catch up. Okay, so hi, Jacki. This is Jacki Edry. Jacki Edry wrote a fabulous, fabulous book about her life, and it's called Moving Forward: Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery, and Faith. Jacki, if you pick up your cover, because mine is the old cover, so that people see what we're talking about.
It looks a little backwards. The types it backwards for some reason, but that's what it looks like.
Okay, but I think to see the cover, the colors and everything would help. Okay, and this is on sale. Where is it on sale, Jacki?
You can find it on Amazon. And actually I think some other, Amazon is probably the best place. And you can go into my website as well, and there's a link to the site, to Amazon as well. And I also have a blog on my site. So I'm always happy to people
we could put that all underneath at the end of the show. Okay. I'll put that all underneath so that you could do that. And we'll also put a link to the actual Amazon book so that you could buy that straight from Amazon. But it is a fantastic book. I mean, you could see from the way mine is that it's very well read. It's not just something that I put down. Sometimes I read books and I think, oh gosh, they're not going to do much for me. But this was really a fabulous book. And we reviewed it in the magazine. And after reviewing it in the magazine, once I started these talks, I thought, even if Jacki has no presence on Instagram, she's very, very quiet on Instagram, I still wanted to have her because I feel that your story is something to talk about. It's just such an amazing thing. And I think we should start by the one place that the whole book starts at. And it talks about when you had a brain tumor, and how you had to have an operation, and how you knew from then how your life was going to change. Did you realize how much it would change?
No. I mean, well, it's changed in so many ways. The first thing was I woke up and my senses were completely scrambled, and I had no idea that that was going to happen. I mean, the doctor said I was likely have a lot of things, but he didn't give me a heads up about that one. And so when senses are scrambled, your whole way of perceiving the environment and the world becomes completely different. And, you know, it gave me a lot of insights because I have an autistic son and other neurodivergent children, and I've been working with them for many years. So I had always perceived, you know, observed them from the outside and thinking certain things were going on in their brain, or watching their behavior and think certain things were going on and how to help them. And a lot of ways, the things that I've done over the years are different than the mainstream. And what was the most wonderful thing about it for me was to actually realize that I was down the right path all along. And I didn't wake up and have this happen and feel as if I'd been making a big mistake all those years of working with the children that I've been working with and with my own son. And then I also realized that God didn't leave me here on this earth to keep that to myself, that I really needed to get the word out, because I think I could help a lot of people. And so I wrote a book to get the word out, and I've started a blog, and I've spent the last year and a half networking with people around the world and trying to get the word out, and that's been amazing. So,
I mean, I've seen you on LinkedIn. You put such amazing things out, and it's like, you know, even, I mean, Baruch Hashem, I'm not dealing with autism or neurodiversity, which actually everyone has a slight autism. I think that autism is a word that people put a certain face to it. Maybe you could explain what is autism and what is neurodiversity. What's the differences in that title?
Well, they're two different things, although autism does fall into the neurodiversity category. Neurodiversity, first of all, neurodiversity is we're all neurodiverse. We all have different brains and different ways of thinking. So in that sense, our brains are built differently, and we perceive things differently, so we're all neurodiverse, having to do with brain, thought, perception, etc. A neurodivergent means that the norm, or the accepted per se norm, if there is something that's called a norm, someone diverges from it, which is things that fall into that category can be ADHD or dyslexia or sensory processing disorder or auditory processing disorder or autism or things of the like. So that's anything that's not particularly considered to be neurotypical, which is the norm. And autism is a huge spectrum, and I don't think there's any way to actually define it. There's a DSM definition, which is, in my opinion, doesn't really present a picture that anyone can particularly work with, and it's very, very negative in a lot of ways, and it's a huge spectrum. So I tend to not think about it that too much. Rather, I think it's just a different way of perceiving the world and a different way of processing information and a different way of thought. It's a different neurological makeup, and sensory processing and perception is one of the biggest things that's very, very prominent in autism. Some autistic people have high verbal languages and function in a way that's considered fairly typical, and then others need lots and lots of support in other ways, or basic daily functioning. And there are a lot of people that have a combination of certain things that they can do that are considered to be very even gifted or high functioning, if you use a functioning label, which I don't like, actually. Unfortunately, the medical community uses functioning levels to define.
The schools are using it. Yeah.
And there's a big push to get rid of that, because let's say for my son, for example, who has very minimal verbal ability, which is considered low functioning, but his daily skills or his functioning is very high. So there are two things but then he can't do math. So that's the things that says up and down, or considered a spiky type profile.
I can't do maths.
Yeah,
No.
well, I'm not great either. But so it's really differing abilities, and I think autism is different sensory perception and differing abilities, and if we can find the right supports, then things can be positive. It's not this horrible bleak picture that many huge industry behind is trying to push.
Do you think it's become more that way or less?
More that way what?
More that people are trying to label it, or less?
No, autism is, no, they're definitely trying to label everything. And there were like some distinctions in the spectrum that have disappeared in the latest DSMs, like Asperger is no longer existing. They put everything under this big umbrella. So if you take 10 people with autistic people and put them in a room, you're going to see 10 totally different things. So it's a term that's not particularly helpful in terms of understanding the person you're with. So if you know someone who's diagnosed autistic, then the best thing to do is to try and figure out what their specific challenges are, what their supports are that they will need are, and just look at the person in front of you. And then that will tell you a lot more than the letters, whether it be autism or ADHD or any other, whatever it may be. Just look at the person. That's where I'm at.
That's really what it is. It's understanding the person who's in front of you, and not just labeling them with a big umbrella thing that doesn't really help that person. It just puts them into a corner. That's my way of thinking about it.
It doesn't give you a lot of information. It's useful for helping. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's useful once you could get in England. You could get a, what's it called, from the government. They'll give you money to help.
Yeah, it's a stipend.
So
what a diagnosis is important for a few reasons. One of them that it gives you eligibility, not only in England, wherever you are, for support, and it's definitely necessary. And the other thing I think for people is to know that they are different. And sometimes people feel different all along, and they're not diagnosed. And at some point, they start saying, "What's wrong with me?" all the time.
So, do you think if that a child who has autism should be told? I mean, how would you tell a person to treat? I mean, as a parent, what would you say?
It totally depends on the age, I think, and the cognitive abilities of the child at that particular age. What I did when my son was young was to say to him, you have difference with language. It's hard for you. This is hard for you. That's hard for you. Let's think of what can help you. And I talked about more the things that were going on as opposed to a label. And as he got older, then, especially because the medical and communities and educational communities would say, well, what's wrong with him? Which is something I think is a horrible thing to do, especially if a child's sitting next to you. You don't talk around a person.
Yeah, they make believe that he's not there.
But I didn't want him to have that sense of something was wrong with him. So I explained to him that he's different, and different is not lesser. It's different. Certain things he needs more supports from than the average folks, and certain things he's better at than the average folks. But aren't we all, in the sense 100%. Of different. So it's different and not lesser, and that was a message. And then I started using the word autism so that he would know what that meant. But I didn't tell him what's your autism? What's different about you? Your autism makes it hard for you to speak. Your autism, as part of your autism is that you think in pictures. Part of your autism is that you have visual things going on or sensory things going on. So that's really more where we discussed it. Yeah.
Wow. And after you had the operation, do you think your vision of it changed? Your perception of what was going on with him changed?
The thing that I understood better was that something that I thought all along, but something that I really understood better was the whole deal of how sensory rules. You cannot fight with your senses. So your cognition does not overrule your senses, which means if there's a place where, let's say, I don't know, a school performance, let's say, and I want to go see my kid perform the school performance, and I go to, or a wedding or something like that, and I walk to the hall, and I open the door, and I see flashing lights and really loud music, and my senses say to me, run away, and my brain says to me, no, you can handle this. It's going to be fine. You know, it's nothing. There's nothing threatening. You don't have to go into fight, flight, freeze mode. You can be fine. And so I step over that thing, that door frame, and I go sit down, and 10 minutes later, my body's starting to shake or shut down or do whatever. So you cannot
fight it. That's right.
And therefore, and you can't reason with it either. It just doesn't matter. Your body's going to do what it's going to do. And that affects the way people understand or treat autism, because a lot of times, let's say a tantrum is considered, or a meltdown, or whatever it may be, is considered. There's a difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. Okay, it's not bad behavior. If a person's in sensory overload and they freak out or they refuse to go into a place, it's for a reason. And to understand that it's not a bad behavior, but it's survival mode, then the parents' reaction to that is very different. If I think my kid's having a really hard time somewhere and it's making them really uncomfortable, it's not the same as they're throwing a tantrum because they want me to buy them something in the store.
Yeah.
And that's bad behavior is one thing, and a sensory overload is another thing. And that really needs to be considered. And lots of the treatment, like ABA, which is a very common treatment, tries to deal with sensory things, or stimming, which is another thing that's common in autism, as treated as a negative behavior.
Okay, stimming,
I will explain. Stimming is self-stimulatory behavior, is now called stimming. And what it is some repetitive type of movement. It could be rocking, it could be twirling fingers, it can be bouncing their leg, it can be any kind of repetitive type of movement. Sometimes it's vocal too. It can be making a noise or saying a sentence over and over, whatever it may be. And the assumption that it's a behavioral problem is wrong. And STIM should not be, in my opinion, and many, many, many autistic adults who have the ability to speak about it say it should not be stopped. Stimming is something that balances out the system. And when I was after my brain surgery, I had a feeling that there were weights pushing me on the left side really hard, like 50 pounds are pushing me, and I'm trying to stand up straight, and I feel this weight, which of course no one can see. This stuff is invisible, but I feel it. So I find myself rocking, and that would make my system balance out, and that was understandable. And people try and tell autistic kids not to rock because it doesn't look nice. I don't know what the deal is, but they think it's negative, but it balances the vestibular system. And then my physical therapist actually told me to hold on a chair and rock to get myself organized.
Wow. So you really understood what was happening then.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's so much going on inside the person's head that is completely invisible to the person observing. So
I'll tell you, it's really interesting actually that you bring my mother, as you know, I don't know if you know, anyway, my story of the magazine was my mother died, and she died very suddenly, but she actually had a meningioma for years.
No, that's what I had, a meningioma.
And they couldn't operate on it. Mm-hmm. And they always said, we'll check the how much it grows. Did you have that every year? They checked how much it grew.
Well, mine apparently was in my head for like 10, 15 years before it was discovered, and it was sitting on my brainstem.
Wow.
And the minute I was in surgery like within 2 weeks after they discovered it.
So it was totally different because my mother, she had it for many years, and they just kept on checking how it was growing. And
well, that's what they do now. I do that since my surgery. I go every year.
And to have it checked.
And I had to have radio surgery, which if it's small enough, then they can zap it with radio surgery.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't, hopefully it will kill the remaining.
So by my mother, what was going on was she was having little TIAs, which is
Yeah.
little strokes.
Right.
But she was always working and everything, but there would come a time that she just really could not anymore. And she was
Sure.
the tiredness and her whole, it's very interesting to hear this whole thing, what you're saying, because I can understand now more of what went on in her brain and how,
Sure.
yeah, very interesting, really interesting. It's the weirdest thing is that she didn't even die from that. That she just had a brain, a catastrophic brain bleed, and that was it. It had nothing to do with that. So it was very weird.
Sorry.
That's why when I started reading your book, it brought so much of my mother and the story. I think it, in a way, connected me in that way. That yeah. But what would you tell a parent who's starting to see that their child has differences and they're not sure if they're autistic or neurodivergent, or they don't understand what's going on? What would your advice be to them?
First thing is trust your instincts. If you think something's going on, then get it checked. And sometimes medical professionals will say to you too, it's nothing. No, trust your instincts. There's something going on with the child. Second is try and observe and keep a record and try and figure out what's going on and keep track of it so that you have accurate information if you're going towards the assessment process. And if you do get assessed and diagnosed, whatever it may be, remember your child is the same child you loved before and after the diagnosis. Nothing has changed. And try and figure out, like I said, what sensory things or what's going on with that child and figure out the ways to help them. That's really what it all boils down to. And if you're, with a partner, you work with your partner to try and not blame each other and not think who's responsible for this. It's not helpful, but okay, how can we do this together and realize that everybody handles a diagnosis differently and everyone needs to process it and their time and their feelings differently, and that's trying to understand each other.
But that is a very big thing. It's in a way you mourn the child that you thought you were going to have.
Yeah, it can.
It could happen.
And the problem a lot of times is that the medical community tends to convince you that your child is going to have a miserable life and will never be happy and will never be able to do anything, and that's devastating for a parent. But if you leave that behind and realize that is not necessarily the case, and even as a child as young is very challenging, that doesn't mean they're going to necessarily stay that way. And then if they try to push a treatment on you that doesn't seem right to you, like ABA, for example, which didn't seem right. And it's similar to, looks like training a dog, actually.
Is that the one that you were talking about that you went to?
Behavior modification.
Yeah.
It's called ABA now.
Okay. Could you explain that a little bit? I thought that was really an amazing thing, that story of that child that you
okay.
Yeah. I think that's something to share. Yeah.
ABA is a treatment that is the most popular treatment, and there's a huge industry behind it. Actually, there's a book called I think it's called the Autism Industrial Complex, which is anyone who is interested in learning about.
So maybe also add that to the bottom of the.
I need to look it up, but I think it's called the Autism Industrial Complex. Okay. Learn about how this has become a whole industry, billions of dollars around the world. And the ABA industry is right up there, and in many cases it's the only treatment that is funded. But it's very similar to what was originally. I mean, if it's going to sound awful, but this is what comes into my mind when I see it, is if you ever train a dog, it's sort of similar. You tell the dog to do something and you give it a treat. Oftentimes it's food, and oftentimes the assumption is that an autistic individual child does not respond to social interaction or have feelings, and I 100%, not 90, not 50, not 30, 100% disagree with that. That is just no. And so if they assume they can't respond to anything that will reinforce a positive behavior, it's all about behaviors and reinforcement. And it doesn't create a natural environment of reciprocity or mutual respect. It's all, you do this for me, you get a reward. And that's
I think when you spoke in the book about this and you gave the example of, I think the child was called Mark, was I?
Yeah,
right?
you remember correctly.
Yeah. I think that was a really good example of what happens. You were saying that first you saw this child and you worked with him when he was doing a different process, and then they changed him to this type of and how it made such a difference, how the child completely changed.
He was destroyed. Yeah, it was so sad. It was so sad.
That's absolutely awful.
Yeah,
that's really awful.
It was that at that point. It actually made me change my thesis, because my thesis was supposed to be on how autists exercise affects stimming, and if the person was more balanced, then they would less need to do any sort of stimming. And I wanted to check if that was a theory, because it's something that I observed working with kids in summer camps, and then when I went there and saw what they were doing with these kids, my heart just broke, and I said, no.
This is wrong.
Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing, actually, because we only have this half hour, so we really can't go into your whole book. But it is an amazing thing how you used to work first with children who were on the spectrum, and how your life brought you your son.
It's all hashgacha.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It gave you all the tools you needed. Really.
Exactly. Way before I had my own son.
Yeah.
And
I think that's an amazing, that's why I think the whole thing, the name of the book, when you say, brain surgery and faith, I think faith is such an important part of this book. I think it came through very, very, very strongly. So I came from a non-religious background, and all along there was something going on internally that made me curious to come to Israel with no real reason to want to do that in terms of my upbringing. And the minute I saw Jerusalem, I was like, oh, I'm home. And it just, something switched in my head. And then I went back to New York, and then I said, no, I need to go back to Israel. I'm not finished there yet. Where are you originally from?
I'm from Great Neck, New York.
Oh, wow.
I grew up there, and then I was in Massachusetts for college, and then I came right after college. I came to Israel. But that was just all the things. There's so many circles in my life that I realized that God is definitely overseeing what's going on.
100%. That's the truth. That I think that's the uplifting message that we have to give.
There's no question.
Yeah.
And hope is, and that you can always do one more mitzvah. Faith gives you, and prayer gives you, a reason to get up out of the bed in the morning, even if your body is saying, no point. You can always do good. It doesn't matter, and you never know what's going to happen, because people can give you a very bleak out prediction about what's going to happen, whether it be about your child, about yourself. But God controls
Especially, it. Really, you must have really felt that when you went into that operation. I can imagine all the warnings they gave you beforehand.
Basically signed off that if I was going to come out of it, they were not responsible for anything that was going to be.
Yeah. I know. I had an operation, and there was touching on one of the bones, and they wrote, they give you a whole thing to sign, and I'm thinking, hold on, I'm not having this operation. Push it off.
Well, I knew it. If I did the operation, then I might die, or I might be completely paralyzed, or completely whatever. Or if I don't have the operation, I definitely die. So I didn't really have
much of a choice.
No. The only thing that was left to say Shema Yisrael, and I'm on your hands, and that's what I did.
That's it. That's what we all have. Anyways, it's been really wonderful to speak to you. Can I just ask if anyone has any questions? I don't know who's here, who's not here. If anyone has any questions, you can ask now. I don't see anything.
Well, if I know people will probably watch after, because you have a following. So if anyone does have any questions or anything, they can always type to you in your account. You can let me know. I'm happy to answer.
Yeah,
I'm happy to at any time.
Yeah. Okay. So it's going to be on YouTube after this. And we'll keep it also on this platform that you could share it out if you want. And remember that we'll be back next week. And if you know anyone who wants to join in our talks, please let us know. And it's been really great to see you. And it's such a nice way to start the week. It really is.
Definitely.
It gives you so
great
much.
To finally meet you.
Yeah. It's so funny. I'm meeting so many new people from so many
wonderful.
all over. It's been amazing. I went to Los Angeles a few, like a month ago.
Yeah.
And also it was all through this uplift. I never met any of these women before, and I just met them face to face. They had just been in the magazine beforehand, and it's been so amazing. It's really been an amazing experience, this. Anyway.
Well, I hope you reach as wide an audience as you would like to reach.
Amen. Amen. That's a really good bracha. Thank you. Anyways, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Good night, and good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.